Welcome to episode 101 of the BCF ORG podcast, The Business of Business. I'm Brian Fisher. In the previous episode, 100, we reviewed the previous podcast series episodes. This podcast series is targeted to business owners and C-suite executives. It reflects my 34 years as a business owner and subsequent years as a business mentor and consultant. It focuses on the various subjects and topics to help you run a successful, profitable business. They're approximately 15 minutes long, so you can listen while commuting. Hopefully, you'll find one or two takeaways to implement per episode. Today's episode discusses business accounting for non-accountants with Nolan Bradbury. Based out of Mercer Island, Washington, Nolan Bradbury is the founder and principal at Bradfield Account and Advisory. Nolan is on a mission to revolutionize the way small business owners engage with their finances. With over 2 decades of experience across both public and private sectors, Nolan has crafted a unique approach to accounting that transcends traditional number crunching, turning financial data into powerful narratives that drive growth and profitability. At the heart of Nolan's mission is a passion for empowering entrepreneurs not only to achieve their business objectives, but to transform their accounting processes from a source of stress into a cornerstone of success. He understands that for many business owners, accounting is often seen as their least favorite aspect of running a business, an obstacle rather than an asset, and challenges this perception head-on, making accounting accessible, insightful, and most importantly, something that doesn't suck. Nolan's expertise lies in distilling complex financial information into clear, actionable advice tailored to each business owner's unique situation and goals. This ensures that entrepreneurs are not only equipped to make informed decisions, but are also able to replicate their business success in their personal finances, focusing on what matters most to them. His comprehensive understanding of accounting principles, combined with a genuine desire to impact others' lives positively, makes Nolan an indispensable partner for any entrepreneur seeking to thrive. Let's welcome Nolan Bradbury. Nolan, welcome to the BCF ORG podcast, The Business of Business.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for joining us today, Nolan. Nolan, I'm always interested in people's stories. What's your background becoming the principal at Bradfield Accounting and Advisory?
So, like a lot of accountants, I started out in public accounting and then ultimately transitioned to private. I think where ultimately my story maybe deviates a little bit from other people is that I went to college actually to be a psychologist. I was always been fascinated by the way people make decisions, why they make decisions or don't make decisions. And so when I got to a point in my career where I felt like I could do something a little bit different, I wanted to focus on a practice that really met business owners at a place where they need, which is helping them understand why they're doing what they're doing, but through the optics of accounting and finance.
Well, this episode topic is for people like myself. It's business accounting for non-accountants. How can business owners effectively leverage financial reports and accounting data to effectively manage their business?
Great question. So I think the first thing we have to acknowledge is if we're not an expert in something, it's hard to be an expert at it. And so what I mean by that is that fundamentally, it's hard to get great at something without the help of someone else. And so if you're struggling with understanding or interpreting or leveraging your financial reports or your accounting data, whatever it is, I think the first place I would start with is understanding or trying to get a better grasp of what is it about what you're looking at that is going against what you normally feel. So what I mean by that is oftentimes when we look at information, it isn't always in a format that is usable or meaningful to us. So if we're a creative or an artist or something like that, and we're being given financial reports or tables, it's kind of like we're being given Latin. And it's okay that that's the case, but we also have to understand that what that means is that we have to get the data in different format. And so what I would encourage you to do is work with your expert, your CPA, your bookkeeper, whoever it is that's sort of providing that information, to better understand how you interpret data and help them sort of format it in a way that is more meaningful. So maybe it's KPIs instead of reports. Maybe it's having conversations instead of just being given tables and charts. I think it's about understanding who you are and how you learn, so that the information can be tailored to you as opposed to you having to sort of learn something completely different.
Boy, that couldn't be more spot on, Nolan. I've noticed that accounting packages give reports for accountants, not for management.
It's 100%. I'm not to talk bad of my brethren, but I think as CPAs, we forget that our audience is not more CPAs. We have to remember that they are people who this is not their primary language in a lot of cases, right? And we need to meet them where they're at.
Well, Nolan, why is it critical to having a successful relationship with your CPA?
So I think kind of leveraging upon what we just talked about a little bit, right, is that like to have if you need help in sort of getting the data or interpreting the data or making useful or data-driven decision making from it, then you need to have a relationship with the person who's providing it to you. But I think the key thing here to understand is that if it's what you're actually looking for is relationship, then you have to treat it like a relationship. And what that means is that you have to you have to have good communication. You have to find someone who's going to communicate in a way that you want and need. For example, I think right now across all the generations that are in the workforce, we see quite a range of a way people like to interact with each other. Some people like to meet in person. Some people like to have phone calls. Some people like to text. And neither of those is wrong. It's just a function of like what is going to be the best relationship builder for you. And so I think in order to have that solid relationship in place, you have to understand what it is you need from the relationship, but you also have to treat it like any other relationship you have.
In my business, the relationship with our CPA was key.
If your relationship is something along the lines what a lot of people's is, which is you talk to them once a year around tax time, or maybe you're talking quarterly as the case may be, odds are you're probably not getting the results you want because you're not treating it as a relationship that is as important to be meeting more regularly. There is a very strong coefficient correlation between the effort you put into a relationship and what you get out of it.
We're speaking with Nolan Bradbury, principal at Bradfield Accounting and Advisory. Nolan, what are some common factors that prevent business owners from achieving their goals, and how do they overcome them?
Yeah, so this is going to sound very obvious and perhaps very simple, but it does not necessarily mean it's easy. The biggest limiting factor I see with business owners is actually not defining what their actual goal is. Again, that sounds very obvious, but it's like with anything. If you opened up Google Maps and you're trying to get to an endpoint, you actually have to tell it what the endpoint is. Otherwise, you're not going to get directions to it. And so oftentimes what I see is either they don't know what it is or they haven't really been honest about what it is. And that's a function of, I think, for whatever reason within our society right now, we don't give ourselves the permission to truly reflect upon and acknowledge what we want and why we want it. So quick example, I had the situation where a business owner said, "Hey, I want to get to 7 figures in revenue." And I said, "Why?" And it took 3 or 4 iterations of them answering that question and coming back to it before we ultimately got to what he really wanted, which was he wanted to have a business where he could go to his son's baseball 3 nights a week and not have the business suffer as a result. Now, here's the important thing to take away from that. Those are very different goals that you're trying to achieve. Okay. And in fact, getting to 7 figures may not actually allow you to reach that goal when you actually define it that way.
Nolan, what results or lessons learned have you seen with business owners that have implemented your recommendations?
Great question. I'll give 2 sort of brief examples because I think they illustrate this from slightly different perspectives and where we commonly see this. So first example is working with a dentist, was kind of in a place where he wanted to get out because the practice was taxing him too much and just wasn't seeing the results he wanted. We started working together. He started to lean more into the financial results, started to understand them better, didn't view them as an enemy, if you will. And what we saw was revenue went from about $300,000 a month in December, and last month he did $750,000 a month. Now, that doesn't mean that every single time that's going to happen, but what we saw was he better understood his business so he could make better decisions about where he was investing his resources, time, money, etc. The other example I'll give you comes at it from a slightly different perspective, which was I had a client who was wanting to sell his business. He wanted to get out of it. The problem was, though, he hadn't created a business. He created a job for himself. And so what we actually had to do was we had to kind of redesign the way his company was operating so that the role he had created was no longer the bottleneck for everything else. So he had a very custom deliverable. And once we standardized that for his audience, which ironically was kind of redoing everything, but making it easier, he no longer was for us the linchpin in everything. He could step back from it. And actually, ironically, what was kind of funny is when he got to that point, he no longer wanted to exit because he was making money and wasn't involved in the business as much anymore, which is what he wanted in the first place. So it's kind of funny how that came full circle. But like, that's exactly what we're talking about, is that like sometimes you have to, once you start to understand what the data is telling you, then you can start to make the best decisions for yourself.
We're speaking with Nolan Bradbury, principal at Bradfield Accounting and Advisory. Nolan, is there anything I've not asked that you'd like to add?
So I don't know if it's a specific question, but there's two sort of principles that I want to share with people because I think it's helpful for business owners in your audience. So the first one is I'm going to reference Newton's first law of motion, which I know sounds weird to bring in something like that into an accounting conversation. But what it says is that things at rest remain at rest, or things in motion stay in motion. And what's important for that the reason I mention that is if you're stuck or you find yourself in a place where you're not able to grow or get past whatever hurdle you're at, it's going to be hard for you to do that on your own. It's going to be hard to start that process and overcome the friction of where you're currently at without the help or assistance from someone who can move you in the right direction, an expert, if you will. So I think if you find yourself in that place, don't be hard on yourself. Just understand that that's where you're at and find the help that you need. Second thing I'll mention is something called the rule of 3 and 10. So for those of you out there who aren't familiar with this rule, what it basically says is that as businesses scale in increments from 1 to 3 to 10, and that can be in terms of people, revenue, sales, whatever the case may be, the company starts to become inefficient and its processes and operations will break down. And the reason that this is important to understand is similarly, if you're scaling as a business, and let's say you get to 1.2 million in revenue, and you're like, okay, this is great. I want to get to 3 million in revenue. And you're unable to get past that hurdle, it's probably because you haven't changed your business from being a $1 million business. You're still operating as that. And to get to 3 million, you have to start operating as a $3 million business. And as obvious as that sounds, as business owners, we get stuck in our ways. We think this is what got me to this place. This is when it's going to get me to the next place. And that is very rarely the case. Oftentimes businesses have to grow, they have to change, they have to augment to get to the next level they're trying to get to. So if you find yourself stuck in one of those places, again, don't beat yourself up. Just understand that perhaps what you need is to sort of reevaluate not just what got you here, but what's going to get you to that next level.
Nolan, how can people get in contact with you?
Yeah, so easiest way probably is if you're on social media, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's a very easy, sort of low risk way to message me and connect with me that way. Alternatively, you can reach out through our website. We have a contact form out there. You can put any information in, have any questions, feel free to put that in the box, and we'll be sure to get back to you and figure out a way if there's something we can do to help you.
Nolan, thank you for joining us today on the BCF ORG podcast, The Business of Business.
Thanks, Brian.
My sincere thanks to Nolan Bradbury for joining us today. Managing the performance of your company is one of the most important things you do as a leader. This podcast is on YouTube and over 20 podcast directories. In search, type BCF ORG. Be sure to leave a space between BCF and ORG. And don't forget to like, subscribe, or follow the podcast. If you'd like to reach out to me for business consulting, schedule a speaking engagement, ask questions, make comments, suggest ideas, or potentially be a guest like Nolan, please go to bcforg.com. There's a red Contact Us button in the middle of the homepage. A LinkedIn symbol's on the upper right. Click on that if you'd like to see my profile. All the podcasts are available by clicking on the website podcast page in the reference bar. These podcasts will be released the first and third Tuesday each month. In the next episode, 102, our guest will be Michael Fortenberry, discussing hourly wage compensation. In business, running a successful, profitable business is the ultimate scorecard. You are never done and can always be better. It tends to be more fun than work, frustrating at times, but can be very rewarding. And don't underestimate the value of a business plan and financial planning. From BCF ORG Corp., I'm Brian Fisher, wishing you the best. Thanks.